Hey YouTube, still March 6th. I wanted to make one more video before I start my day. And this video is how I met a very famous person at the Waffle House. On April 9th, 2014, the next day my wife was flying up to New Jersey to take care of her mom, Ethel, who was dying from multiple myeloma. Who knows if it was caused by the terror attacks on the World Trade Center. I know a lot of people were exposed to things, and there was a lot of cancer and different things going on around there. But I don't know, we could never prove that, I guess. But I said to Tammy, we just got finished packing her suitcase, and I said, come on, hon, let's go to the Waffle House and get a little late night breakfast. And this way tomorrow morning we can just get on the road and get down, try to beat the traffic down to the airport. And she was going to go up and take care of her mom and be with her for the last whatever life she had left. She ended up dying on April 22nd. So she went to 10th. She had 12 days with her mom. She was able to take care of her and tell her that she loved her. And, for most of the time she was coherent enough where she understood that Tammy was there. And, she said, my baby, when she walked in. So it was nice that she could be there. So I was taking care of the kids, and I was driving Stephen back and forth. For those of you who don't know, I have a son with autism, and he didn't drive, but he was going to college. Doctor said he never would. They said he'd never walk. They said he'd never talk. He'd never go to a normal school. He'd probably have to be institutionalized. Well, Stephen was in an institution, Kennesaw State College, the institution of higher learning, and he graduated with honors. So proud of that kid. And I'll tell you some more stories about him at another time. So we went to the Waffle House. And we sat down at the low counter at the end of the Waffle House. There's a high counter, and then there's a low counter. It's like an L. There's two here, and there's three across, on the L. So there was a guy sitting on the other side, right next to where Tammy was sitting. It was me, then Tammy, and then the L, and then it was this guy. And he had a Stetson hat on. He had a ponytail. He was a cool-looking guy. He was an older guy. Turned out he was 63 at the time, but it was a hard 63. He had a rough life, I think. So we sat down. He introduced himself right away. He was an outgoing, good guy, He said, hi, I'm Bob. I said, hey, I'm Boomer. And this is my wife, Tammy. He said, Boomer? I said, well, my friends call me Boomer. I'm Steve, but my friends call me Boomer, Robert. He said, oh, no, don't call me Robert. He said, my friends call me Bob. And I was like, okay, Bob, I'll never call you Robert again. So we were sitting there and we were having a good time and talking, and he was telling jokes. He was a good joke teller. So I was telling some jokes, and here I am. I'm from New Jersey, and he even had said, you're not from down here, are you? I said, no, I'm from New Jersey. And he had said that he had a friend. He was from New York, and he said he didn't have many friends from up there, but he had a friend from New York. And we just hit it off, and he loved my jokes. So after about we were eating our eggs or eating our stuff. He said, how would you and Miss Tammy like to come back to my house? And I said, I don't know, Bob. You don't have a dungeon over there. This isn't some Jeffrey Dahmer situation, is it? And he said, no, you'd have a good time. And I said, well, I'll think about it. So I excused myself and I went to the bathroom. And when I came back, I actually didn't have to go to the bathroom. I just wanted to ask the waitress, who is this guy? So her name was Destiny. We knew her from the Waffle House. We had seen her several times. She was a great girl, wonderful waitress. And I said, Destiny, come here. So she came over to me and I said, see that guy over there? And she said, yeah. I said, do you know him? She said, oh, yeah, he's a regular. I said, geez, I've been in here a lot. I've never seen him before. He just invited us back to his house. And she went, oh, if I was you, I'd go. I said, what do you mean? She goes, I don't want to say nothing. If I was you, I'd go. So we were like, whoa, okay, I'm intrigued now. So I went back to the table. I said, Bob, I've been thinking about it. We can't stay too long because Tammy's got to go to the airport in the morning. But yeah, we'll come back to your house. And Tammy was kicking me under the table. Like, oh, I don't know if she wanted to do it. She thought it was a, Jeffrey Dahmer situation. So we said, let's go. He had a yellow Dodge Hemi. It was like you could see that thing coming from miles away. I'm sure you've seen them around if you've seen one. It's like a canary yellow, bright yellow truck. And you would see it come from miles. So we followed him back to his house, and he lived up on Tower Ridge Road in Cartersville, Georgia, off of Rudy York. It was like the highest elevation in Cartersville. It was up on the mountain. It was a really squirrely ride on the way up. A lot of curves, and it was I can't imagine coming down that road when it's raining or black ice or something. So we went up to the top of the hill, and sure enough, there's a big house, acreage, beautiful. So we walk in the house, and he's got 4 cats and 2 dogs. And I love animals, as you can tell, as you know. Tammy does too. She's a cat girl. So we sat on this. He let us sit on this leather couch he had. He had a couch and a love seat. He sat on a love seat, and me and Tammy sat on the couch. And before you knew it, I had a cat on my lap. I had a cat on my shoulder. I had a dog in my lap. There was a cat walking on the back of the couch. Tammy had a cat and a dog in her lap. 6 animals in our laps and walking on the thing. Unbelievable. So Bob said, man, those cats don't go to nobody. And I said, well, I'm like Dr. Doolittle, I love animals, just like Molly. If you saw my other video, just like Tammy's cat took a liking to me, and that's what got me in with Tammy. He said, that one cat right there on your lap is a feral cat. That cat don't go to nobody. I can't remember the name. I know Josie and Poco were the dogs. I can't remember the cats' names, but, beautiful cats. So we were sitting there for a little while and talking and having a great time. And he said, hey, I got a surprise for you in the basement. I said, Tammy, run. It's the dungeon. Let's get the hell out of here before we're on the menu like a that movie Hostel situation. He's going to be down there with the drilling into my knee. It was crazy. We were laughing. And he said, no, come on, please. You'll have a good time. So I said, all right, come on. Tammy said, I'm not going down there. You go first. So I went down, opened the door to go down the cellar, and there were 6 stairs going down. And you went down 6 stairs, and there was a huge picture of Lynyrd Skynyrd when they're in the early Lynyrd Skynyrd. So I said, oh man, Lynyrd Skynyrd. I love Lynyrd Skynyrd. He said, you do? He said, yep, me too. So I made a right, and I went down 8 more stairs, and there was soundproofing all over the walls. I said, Tammy, run. It's the dungeon. You can't hear the screams from the street. He said, no, go around the corner. You'll see why I have the soundproofing. So I went around the corner, and sure enough, there was a set of drums. So I said, oh, you play the drums? He said, yeah, a little bit, So he said, come on, Tam, it's okay. Come on down. Bob went first. Tammy followed Bob. So we go down there, and Bob sits at the drum set. He puts on his PA system, and he plays 2 Aerosmith songs and 4 Lynyrd Skynyrd songs. He played Needle in the Spoon, Simple Man, Tuesday's Gone, and he ended up with Sweet Home Alabama. And when I tell you, you felt like you were at a concert, He had long sleeve shirt on. He was sweating like a pig. And he got up, and I said, oh my God. Me and Tammy stood up. We made like we had lighters in our hand. We were giving him a standing ovation. I said, my God, Bob, that was fantastic. Tammy said, oh, Bob, oh my God, that was fantastic. We love Lynyrd Skynyrd. Well, I did. Tammy's more like, Neil Diamond and Barry Manilow and James Taylor. That's her genre. We're opposites when it comes to music. But I love Lynyrd Skynyrd. And I said, that was fantastic. You must have been in a band. He said, yeah, maybe you heard of him. Lynyrd Skynyrd? And I said, what? He put out his hand. It's the only time he ever shook my hand. He would always do fist bumps. He shook my hand. He said, hi, I'm Bob Burns. I am the original drummer of Lynyrd Skynyrd. And who wouldn't be impressed at something like that? Of course, you're going to go home and Google Bob Burns because, is this guy really Bob Burns? Well, I said to Bob, that was fantastic. I really appreciate that. That is certainly a memory for the grandkids, for the kids and the grandkids, which I don't have grandkids. I wish I did. I'm going to cry. But we had a fantastic time, and we met Bob. And turns out Bob Burns is the original drummer of Lynyrd Skynyrd. I said, Bob, I've got to get up early in the morning, and I got to take Tammy down to Atlanta. We want to get down there 3 hours before the flight. We want to make sure we're there early, make sure everything goes good because she's got to be with her mom. He said, I understand. So he said, you know what? Give me your phone number, just in case we ever run into each other. Give me your phone number. So I gave him my phone number. I had a little flip phone. He had like two smartphones. He loved his phones. He had both phones going at the same time. And he must have been a popular guy. Of course, if he's Lynyrd Skynyrd drummer, he is. Maybe he's got one for his friends and one for business. I don't know. So we excused ourselves, and the next morning we got up, and we were tired because we didn't sleep much. We got up, and Sure enough, we get down Atlanta on time, and Tammy gets her flight. Well, on the way back on Route 75, my phone rings. So I answer the phone. It's Bob. He said, "Hey, Boomer, did you drop off Miss Tammy at the airport yet?" And I said, "Yeah, Bob, I did, and I'm on 75 right now, coming back." He said, "Where are you?" And I said, "I'm not too far. I'm down by Marietta." He said, "Oh, okay. Do me a favor. Come on over." I was like, "What?" He said, "Yeah, man, we had such a good time last night. Please come over." I said, "Of course. Yeah, I'd love to. So I don't think Stephen had college that day, so I didn't have to worry about driving Stephen down to Kennesaw that day, if I'm not mistaken. So I get to Bob's house, and I'm knocking on the door, ringing the doorbell. Nothing. Nobody's answering. I'm like, what the hell's going on? So the door was unlocked, so I kind of opened the door and peeked in. The dogs were going crazy. They recognized me. They were like, oh, they wanted to jump in my lap again. So I yelled, "Bob, Bob." And all of a sudden I heard, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." I said, "Bob, it's Boomer. You told me to come over." He goes, "Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I fell asleep, on the couch." Bob was a night owl. So after we left that night, he probably stayed up another 4 hours. He called it band time. He called it band time. He was a late night guy, and then he'd get up late. But I walked in there, and Bob was all disheveled. He pulled himself together, and we sat down at the table, and he lit a cigarette. And I said, "Oh, Bob, I'm gonna go outside and wait for you to finish your cigarette." He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "I cannot stand cigarettes." I said, "I really don't like cigarettes." So he said, "Oh, I'm sorry." He said, "Here, I'll be right back." So he went out on the back deck, and I went out with him, and we sat there for a minute. He had a cigarette, and we came back in, sat down. He goes, "Hey, come on, I'll show you the house." So he gave me the tour of the house. We went upstairs. He showed me the house. He goes, "Hey, come on in here." It was the master bedroom. The master bathroom. So we walk in. He had these high chairs, and I guess that's where his wife did her makeup. He had a wife, Marcia, who had passed away. I'm sorry to hear. Rest in peace, Marcia. I hear she was a wonderful woman, and I know her and Tammy would have got along famously. Bob has two daughters, Kiki and Lou, and later on I had got to meet them too, and we're still friends to this day. This is 12 years later. We're still friends. Kiki had a child. Bob would have been a grandfather. Lou went through some cancer, but she beat it. She's just great girls. I love them to death. And Lou's got Freddie. Unfortunately, Kiki's, guy is not in the picture. That's his bad. All right. She's a great girl, and the kid is lovely. So we just had a good time. We're sitting there talking. He goes, "Hey, look at that hat over there. Put that hat on. So was the Stetson hats. There was like three of them sitting there. He goes, I put it on, and I looked terrible in a hat. The only hat I ever wore was a baseball hat. I was a shortstop, and I wore a baseball hat, but I'm not a hat guy. And he said, "Man, that hat looks so good on you." I said, "Really? I think it looks terrible." He goes, "Nah, I want you to have that hat." I said, "Bob, please, no." I put that, no. He insisted, "Nope, I'm not, no. Just met you, no. Put the hat down." So he says, "Oh, do me a favor. Do you ever smoke weed?" And I said, "Oh, Bob, back in the day, I was, before drug testing at Budweiser, yeah, I smoked a lot of weed. Yeah, I did." He said, "You still working at Budweiser?" I said, "No, I'm retired now." He goes, "Well, you ever think about taking a puff?" I said, "Well, to be honest with you, my neck has been killing me. I had a injury senior year of football preseason. I hit a tackling dummy the wrong way, and I didn't play the senior year because of a football injury. And I had a car accident when I was 21 on McCarter Highway coming home from Budweiser on the afternoon shift. Guy turned right in front of me, had a Chevy Chevette. I mean, it was like an accordion. How I didn't get killed, if you would have saw that car, how I didn't get killed was amazing. And I broke the windshield with my head and steering wheel with my chest. I mean, it was a mess, and my neck has never been the same since. So I said, maybe I could. No, I don't know. But I'm a one-hit wonder. I don't like to get too high. I just like to get one hit, maybe take the pain off, take the numbness off my neck. So he said, "Reach down there in the cabinet and you'll see something there." And I reached down, and sure enough, there was a big glass jar of beautiful, bright green buds. And he said, "What do you think?" And I opened it up, and it was like the skunk weed. You smell the skunk? I said, "Yeah, Bob, this is some good shit right here." Yep. He goes, "How do you know?" I said, "I told you. I'm a connoisseur. I had a friend in high school. His name was Bob Chapman. Bob's older brother, Basil, was the guy that got the good stuff. He would get stuff for bands that were coming through the Capitol Theater in Passaic. He would get, stuff for the bands. He actually spent some time in the Tombs in New York City for, drug possession. Turned out he become a lawyer. He studied in jail, became a lawyer. So he said, "You know how to roll a joint?" I mean, I said, "Bob, it's like riding a bike. You never forget." So he had a rolling paper, so I took the paper and I folded it in half and I licked it and pulled it apart, so I only had half the paper. I don't like using all that paper. You know what I'm talking about if you're a weed smoker, right? So Bob said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, you don't like all that paper, do you? Let's roll a nice one with not too much paper." So he was impressed. I rolled a fat one. It was perfect. I didn't forget. I didn't forget. So he said, "Man, you could be like the guy that Snoop has. He's got a guy that rolls the dupes for him. The blunts." I was like, "Oh, that's funny." I said, "Hey, Bob, I'll roll as many as you want. While I'm here, I'll roll a few for you." And I did. I rolled about 4 or 5 joints for him to have. And he lit it up, took a puff, passed it over. I took a puff. Oh my God, about 10 minutes later, my neck started feeling a little better. We just had a great time. So the next day, the phone rings. "What are you doing?" "Go on over." And I would help him out. I'd see some dishes. It was a little messy, Bob, his wife's dead, and I would clean up a little bit and do this, this and that. Change the kitty litter because that needed to be done. I took care of them cats and I took care of them dogs. He did too. He was he was an animal, but he wasn't much for changing the kitty litter every day or scooping the poop every day. So I did that for him. And turned out Tammy's mother died on the 22nd, but she ended up spending 6 weeks with Jimmy, her stepfather, even though they weren't married. He was with Ethel for like 22 years. So it was like his stepfather. So she stayed with him, and they through the funeral, through everything, and he got a cat to have as a companion, So Tammy came home 6 weeks later. In that time, me and Bob became so close. And I just want to stress this. I can't stress this enough. I wasn't his friend because he was the Lynyrd Skynyrd drummer. Okay? I'm not some fame chasing, jock sniffing guy. Okay? If I met Michael Jordan tomorrow, I'd say, "Hey, Mike, nice to meet you. I enjoyed the way you played." That was it. I'm not, "Oh, you're a god." Like people would come up to Bob and they'd say, "Oh my God, it's Bob Burns. Can I have your autograph? Oh, he's a god." None of that shit. None of that hero worship bullshit. You know what I mean? He was my friend. I wasn't his fan. I was his friend. And he knew it. And that's why we were so close. Because I wasn't like, "Oh, hey, Bob, were you on the plane that crashed in Mississippi?" What? Even he was. Why would you bring up the saddest day in his life when he lost all his friends and his, friends from childhood? We hardly ever, in that 6 weeks, I didn't bring up Lynyrd Skynyrd one time. If Bob wanted to tell me a story, God bless, I'm all ears. Listening. And for me to be a talker, I'm a talker. I listened. That's some stories you want to hear. But I never asked him to tell me. He volunteered the information on his own. So it was 6 weeks later. Tammy's coming home the next day. And I said, "Bob, I got some bad news." He said, "What?" I said, "Well, Tammy's coming home tomorrow." He knew because when Tammy's mother died, Bob got on the phone. "Oh, Tammy, I'm so sorry you lost your mom." And a couple times he got on the phone. "Hey, Tammy, me and Boomer are having a great time." And anytime I spoke to Tammy, I spoke to her every day. He'd be in the background. "Hey, Miss Tammy, we're having a ball over here. We're having fun. I can't wait for you to get back." And I said, "Well, Bob, we've got our life, and I don't know. Tammy's not a late night person, and I don't know." He said, "Well, you dial Miss Tammy right now. I want to talk to her." So I dialed the phone. I gave it to Bob. He said, "Miss Tammy, this is Bob Burns, the original drummer for Lynyrd Skynyrd." And that's how he would introduce himself. He was proud of it, and I don't blame him, but it was funny. He was a nut. So Tammy said, "Yeah." He said, "You're just going to have to love me too." And he hands me the phone. Tammy said, "What's going on?" I said, "Well, Tammy, we're having such a good time. He doesn't want it to end, and I don't want it to end. So hopefully when you come back, you'll enjoy coming over here and hanging out because we had such a good time that first night." And I said, "We haven't been down in the basement since. We don't ever go down there. We just sit up here and talk and sit on the back deck." And Bob, he would say, "Come on, Boomer, let's go on the back deck. I got to have a cigarette." He would never light a cigarette in the house with me sitting there because he knew it bothered me. Because I had bladder cancer at one time, and the second leading cause of bladder cancer is secondhand smoke. Because I never smoked. That's the number one reason for bladder cancer, smoking. And I never smoked a cigarette in my life. So I got my foot bath right here. I'm doing a little foot bath. I have neuropathy, so while I'm sitting here making my videos, I do my foot bath, So now I lost my ADD's kicking in, right? So, okay. So the next day, Tammy comes home. Pick her up at the airport. We come home, and of course, see the kids and go out and get something to eat. And we go to the Waffle House. And sure enough, Bob's at the Waffle House. Hey, Bob, how you doing? Hey, Miss Tammy. He got up and he gave her a hug. He said, oh, my Tammy, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry you lost your mom, you know. His mom was still alive. And his dad at that time, I believe, yeah. So he gave her a hug. We sat down at our usual chairs, me next to the high counter, Tammy on the end, and then Bob on the other end, you know, facing us. And we just, it was like we she never left. She loved Bob. And I'll tell you right now, she was so good to Bob. She was like his mother. I know she was only, you know, younger than Bob, but she was like his mother, you know, and I was like his brother. But I was like his, even though I was younger than Bob, I was like his big brother. It was just the relationship that we had. And for those of you, I'm sure you don't know, the reason Bob wasn't on the plane was he had a nervous breakdown while they were touring in Europe. He told me the story, he went to see The Exorcist. I guess that's about 1972, 73, whatever, you know, whenever that came out. He saw The Exorcist. He said he came home and like the devil was in him. The devil took over. He had a nervous breakdown. So they actually had to, you know, let Bob go for a minute there. And I think his name was Ricky Medlock. He's still in the tribute band. He played some drums while Bob was on hiatus. Bob got better and came back, and then he just couldn't do it anymore. So that's when Artemis Pyle came into the band, and Artemis was on the plane when it crashed. And God bless Artemis, he lived, you know. So we were over there I started in April 9th, 2014 until April 3rd, 2015. We were with Bob every single day. We had at the Waffle House, at his house, he had a motorhome. We drove around in the motorhome. It could be a movie. It could be a movie. If there's a screenwriter out there, I'm telling you, I got a movie for you, because why not document the original drummer of Lynyrd Skynyrd, you know, who had mental illness and left the band, and 40 years later he runs into some guy and they just form a friendship, you know. And Miss Tammy, she's a big part. She's a bigger part of it than me, because she got Bob on a schedule, taking his medication. He used to take all his pills at once, and sometimes a few would drop on the floor, and he'd say, C minus, you know, and then he'd get them all. He goes, A plus, you know. It was funny. He would rate how he took his medicine. Tammy said, no. You can't do it like that, Bob. I got to get you the thing Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, AM, PM, whatever. She got him on a schedule, and he was feeling good. I think he was making progress. He was feeling a lot better. And so now, other than 3 days, we had a little falling out. And I'm not going to bring up that, but we had a little falling out. And I'll just say that Bob forgot that I was his friend, I was not a fan, I was his friend. He treated me like a fan for 3 days, or 1 day, and we didn't talk for 3 days. But we made up, and that was it. It's like, hey, I'm sorry, you're sorry. This is ridiculous. I love you, you love me. So fast forward to April 3rd, 2015. We're out on the back deck, and I'm telling you, it was the most beautiful moon I've ever seen in my life. You could just reach out and grab the moon. It was right there. It was huge, and it was a full moon. And it was unbelievable. And not a cloud in the sky. And all of a sudden, Bob grabbed Tammy, and he grabbed her and he hugged her, and her glasses almost broke. She's like, "What? Bob, what's the matter?" He goes, "Miss Tammy, I love you. You're so good to me. I'm so glad I met you guys. I've had, one of the best years of my life." I said, "Oh, come on, Bob. Your best years of your life were back with the gang, He said, "Well, you know what I mean. I've had a good time. I've had a really good time." And he grabbed me. Now, Bob, like I said, he never even shook my hand. He never gave me a hug. I tried to give him a hug one time. He's like, "What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you, gay or something?" I'm like, no. He wasn't affectionate with men. Let's put it that way. So he hugged me, and he told me he loved me. He said, "Boomer, you're a good guy. You make me laugh. I've had a lot of good times, and I appreciate you coming over here all the time." And we just had a great time. So then he said, "Ooh, I feel like it's going to rain tonight, And I thought Bob was having an episode, because I looked up in the sky. I looked at the moon. I said, "Bob, this is the most beautiful moon I've ever seen in my life. The Big Dipper is right there. I could even see some of the planets probably, He's like, "No, I feel like it's going to rain." Okay, so the next day we had to take Stephen to college, and we had to get up, fairly early to go take Stephen, and it was getting late. I said, well, we're going to get going, Bob. And he said, no, don't go. I said, no, we got to go. So Tammy would go through a checklist with Bob. I went out and warmed up the car. I gave Bob a fist bump. Said, bye. I'm going to warm up the car, Tammy. You do the checklist, and she would say, all right, here, Bob, here's your cigarettes. Here's your lighter. Here's your phone. Here's your other phone. Here's your cigarettes, whatever, all this. She would do the checklist. Here's your wallet. Because sometimes we get a phone call 4 o'clock in the morning, and I'd be like, Bob, what's going on? Do you know what time it is? He goes, yeah, no, what time is it? I said, well, it's 4 o'clock. He said, AM or PM? I'm like, Bob, AM, we got to get up in the morning and take Stephen to school. He said, well, can you put Miss Tammy on the phone? I'd have to wake up Tammy, and she was used to it by now. I was like, what, Bob? Do you know where my wallet is? And she said, oh, Bob, don't you remember we put it in the brown leather jacket that's sitting on the back of the chair at the kitchen table in the left upper pocket? But, she boom, boom, boom. Here, your cigarettes are here. A lot of times. Here's your phone. I can't find my phone. Tammy would find her phone. Tell him. So that was the kind of relationship they had. Like I said, she was his mother. So, oh my God, I hope I don't choke. up because I love Bob so much. I've cried so many tears, right? So he said, I'm out in the car. So Tammy went through the checklist with Bob, and they're going through the checklist. And Tammy would always give Bob a kiss on the lips when she left. And I'd always say to her, man, what are you doing kissing him on the lips? You know how many thousands of women he's kissed in his life? If I ever show up with a freaking herpes on my lip, I'm blaming you, It was a joke, I didn't give a crap. She loved Bob and he loved her. And you want to kiss her on the lips, that's okay, Tammy loves me. I don't care if you're Bob Burns, original drummer, Leonard Skinner. She ain't leaving me for you. She loves Boomer, right? So she said, Bob, do me a favor. Stay home tonight, especially if you think it's going to rain. You're so impulsive. Just stay home. Don't go to the Waffle House. Just stay home, relax, get some sleep. We'll see you tomorrow. So she kissed him goodbye, told him where everything was. We go out in the car, drive home. As soon as we got in the driveway, it started pouring. We had to run in the house so we didn't get soaking wet. But Tammy said, man, Bob knew. How did he know? Maybe his bones, were aching or something? He knew. So we go upstairs and, get changed and laying in bed, getting ready to go to bed, put the TV on. The phone rings. Bob's dead. What? Bob jumped in his car 10 minutes after we left, impulsive, like Tammy warned him, and he went down the mountain and he hydroplaned on a curve, a dangerous curve there was there, and he hit the tree. He was driving the Buick Roadmaster, not the yellow Dodge Hemi truck, so I wish he had the truck. Maybe he could have lived, but he died. You talk about devastation. Like, we just left you. You just kissed Tammy. You just said you love me. First time ever. What, what's going on here, And it crossed my mind that, he might have killed himself. I don't know. I don't think so. He hydroplaned, he hydroplaned, but it was just the timing of it, telling me you love me, first time ever in a year, and telling Tammy you love her, first time in a year. So, devastated. Go to the funeral, me and Tammy, and Yogi and Deborah, who were good friends of Bob's, even before I met Bob, wonderful people, and Yogi was Bob's friend for years, way before Boomer. Deborah, she'd come over and clean up, and I didn't see him that much because, Yogi was working, and sometimes me and Tammy would go down to Yogi's house. He had a dog, Ginger. I loved that dog, and they welcomed us into their house, and they were so good. But as far as being with Bob and all of us together, it was probably 10 times in that year. But at one time, Yogi and Bob were, tight as, and they were still tight. He loved Yogi. He loved Deborah, Miss Deborah. So they were there, and Destiny, the waitress, that, told me, hey, you better go over there. She was there with us. So we walk up and we sit right behind the family. His brother was sitting there, trophy wife, beautiful lady, trophy wife for the brother. He was a lawyer. The mother was there. The father wasn't there. The mother was there. Lou and Kiki were in the front row, and I was sitting right behind the wife of the lawyer, of Bob's brother, who I had never met, who I only heard him once on the phone talking to Bob. None of them. So he turns around, he looks at me, he goes, who are you? And I felt like maybe I overstepped my bounds because I came up and sat right behind the family, but I was just with them every single day for the last year. I was his best friend. I was the most important person in his life. On the day he died, I think me and Tammy were the most important people in his life. And I said, well, I'm Boomer. And he looked at me and goes, I heard about you. You're right where you need to be. Holy smokes. That was a nice thing to hear. Well, the funny part was, as me being an emotional person, I hadn't cried yet. Tammy cried her eyes out. I hadn't cried yet. And I don't know why. So they had a beautiful, beautiful ceremony. And I think Bob had already been cremated, and there was an urn there with Bob in it. And Artemis Pyle was there, and he had his drums, and he had a little band, and they played Tuesday's Gone, I believe it was Tuesday's Gone. Gary Rossington was there with his wife, the last member that passed away about a couple years ago. Maybe yesterday was the day he had passed away, a couple years ago. And he was there, and I wasn't one of these guys, oh, I'm shaking his hand. I was Bob's friend, none of that. Didn't approach anybody. After the funeral, I did take a picture with Artemis. There's one picture, And, well, when we came out of the funeral, you looked up into the sky, and there was an eagle. There was an eagle circling right above the church. And we all looked up. Everybody noticed it. It was Bob, and he was saying goodbye. It was an eagle. I haven't seen one since. I never saw one before. I've been down here almost 31 years. I've seen one eagle the day Bob's funeral up in the sky. And that was Freebird. That was Bob saying goodbye. Well, still hadn't cried, So, go to Yogi's house. We're all over there, talking about Bob. Oh, Bob came to me in a dream, and this and that. Everybody had a story. Tammy too. Tammy, I dreamt about Bob. I'm like, man, I haven't dreamt about Bob. I haven't. Nothing. He hasn't come to me at all. Nothing. Just then, it's late at night. A yellow butterfly. Yogi had these wooden wind chimes, and they had, it wasn't like the metal ones. They clunked, A yellow butterfly, canary yellow, just like his Dodge Hemi truck, flew and hit the wind chimes. How a butterfly can hit a wooden wind chime and make it clunk. It clunked. And we looked, and Tammy saw it. Some of the people didn't see it because they were facing the wrong way. And me and Tammy said, oh my God. That was Bob. That was it. He was saying goodbye to me. So, after that, they're making the girls were cleaning up at the house and getting it ready. I think Artemis came over the house. We weren't invited. I was I'll be honest with you, Kiki and Lou, I was a little hurt. We weren't invited to the little party that you guys had at the house. I really thought we should have been there. But that's okay. That's okay. We went to a different place. Yogi and Deborah and Tim and me, we just went and had our little dinner together. But it did hurt me. So after that, we had gone back to say goodbye to Bob's house. And we went up to the house, and we I guess Kiki was there, or Lou, whatever, and Bob's truck was there, and I took a picture next to the truck. I wanted to have a truck, a memory of, the Dodge Hemi. Well, on the way down the mountain, at the corner of Tower Ridge Road and Rudy York, there was a bunch of bushes there, and everybody from around put, flowers and condolences, and, it was like a big thing, like if somebody dies on a highway, you see the, the wreath and everything on the highway where somebody had passed away. Well, that's what it was, right there. Well, as we passed and we're looking at everything, a yellow canary type bird with a little black on it poked its head out from the bush. You talk about unbelievable fate. Tammy looked, she saw it. I said, Tammy, look. She said, oh my God. That was Bob. Now you're saying goodbye. You're saying goodbye at the funeral. You're going to heaven. And now you're saying goodbye. You're never going to be in that house again. That's it, Had so many good times there. So, some time passes, and, you think about Bob every day. So we're driving Stephen to school, going down to Kennesaw State College. We're doing 65 miles an hour on Route 75 South. and there's one of these yellow butterflies. There's millions of them down here. So I'm not saying there's one butterfly. There's a lot of them. It's in front of the car. In front, we're driving down the highway at 65 miles an hour, and there's a yellow butterfly following us down the highway. So every time we see one of these yellow butterflies in the backyard or wherever we see, I say, hey, there's Bob. Here's my friend Bob. And I hope you enjoyed that story because he was a great guy. And he hadn't been in the band in 40 years. And, he was, on the downside of his life, not the fame side of his life, but he still, we went to a Leon Russell concert one time. I have a friend, Curtis J. Schmidt, and he was a big Leon Russell fan. He must have went to 100 shows, and he knew the band. Well, Leon was coming to Atlanta, so Curtis called up Jack, who was like the bass player, the big bass, the stand-up bass. He played different instruments, and he got us, tickets to the show, and they were on will call. So me, Bob, and Yogi, the three of us, went down to the concert. And as we got out of the car and we started walking, people recognized, Bob, that's Bob Burns. That's Bob Burns, Lynyrd Skynyrd. And he got a kick out of it. He was a popular guy. And they said, who are you? And Bob said, that's my manager. He introduced me as his manager. And I got a kick out of that. People, they wanted my autograph. I said, no. So I went into the will call and I said, hey, they knew it was Bob. They were excited to see him too. And they gave me the 3 seats. And you're supposed to wait in the line. And it was like, general seat. Whoever gets there first gets the front row. It's not like assigned seating. So they said, okay, we're going to open the door on the side over here for you before we open the other door. And you guys go in and sit wherever you want. So the 3 of us walked in. Nobody's there yet. And there's Leon Russell's piano right there. And I sat right down in front of Leon's piano. And Bob said, no, don't sit there. Let's sit back here. It's a better, acoustically, because, he knows more than we do for. It's acoustically better back here. So I said, Bob, you know me. I don't care. You want to sit there? I'm sitting right here in front of Leon's piano, So Bob came forward and he sat in the front row. And then 2 women had come in. And they were 2 beautiful, beautiful women. And there was a guy playing the early show. His name was Uncle Dave Griffith. And it was his wife and his wife's friend. And they sat down. They let them in early, too. So they were in the front row. The 5 of us are sitting there waiting for everybody else to come in. So we smoked a bone with the drummer, Brandon Holder, outside after the show. A drummer passing it to a drummer, I think Brandon got a kick out of it. But we had so many good times. And I love my friend Bob. And I can't stress it enough. He was my friend. I wasn't his fan. He was my friend, So that's the story of how I met my friend Bob. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe and share. I got a lot of these good stories. And I promise you I'm not a bullshitter. I tell the truth. And I hope you follow me. Thank you so much. I love you all.